Hello, this is Cardboard.Capitan. Today I want to share this black and green ramp deck that I've been tweaking since the release of Bloomburrow. The general idea with any sort of ramp deck is to use certain spells to pull out lands from your deck, significantly more than your opponent, and translate that additional mana to giant win conditions and overrun your opponent. So I'll start with the ramp spells. I have two. First is Heaped Harvest. Heaped Harvest it can pull out 2 lands from your deck and also gain you 3 life. And it's also a permanent, which is significant. I'll talk about that in a bit, but I want to go to Glimpse the Core next. It'll fetch out a forest, and only a forest, from your deck, so be mindful of that, because there are some spells which have double black, such as Flesh Gorger, Cover Up, Season of Loss. So when you're using Fabled Passage to fix your mana base, be aware of what you can play, what you can potentially play, and go from there. Now, going back to Heaped Harvest, I want to talk about Conduit of Worlds. Alongside Fabled Passage, while it's not a true ramp spell, Conduit of Worlds works with Fabled Passage by letting you pull out a basic land each turn. So as long as you have basic lands in your deck, you can use Conduit of Worlds to replay Fabled Passages from your graveyard and hit a land per turn. You can also use it to recur Heaped Harvest for a similar situation, all the while gaining 3 life while you're pulling out basic lands from your deck. Conduit of World also allows you to replay permanent cards from your graveyard with the restriction that you only are able to play 1 spell the turn you activate this ability. Now, that restriction isn't a big deal because you have a few spells which are instant, such as Anoint with Affliction and Trophy, or you can use that extra mana to animate your Restless Kaij or charge your Blast Zone. But a lot of your spells are high converted mana cost spells, so you're likely casting 1 spell per turn anyway. Like, this is 7, this is 7, this is 7, and so on. So this is a very key card against the discard matchup. A lot of black discard decks are exclusively black, and traditionally the way to counter black decks is artifacts and enchantments, because black doesn't have a good way of removing them. So you want to get this out ASAP versus those decks, and you'll likely win just off of this card. I'll be showcasing this in one of the matches I'll be putting up. Next I want to cover the creatures. So I briefly touched on Vaultborn Tyrant. It has great synergy with the aforementioned Conduit of Worlds, but with Vaultborn Tyrant, it'll gain you 3 life, it'll draw you cards, it'll be a 6/6 body, and when the opponent kills it, well, they gotta deal with it again. So again, it's a strong card considering how much black is in the metagame today. And with recursion, through virtue, through conduit, that's painful. Next up is Tranquil Frillback. I don't see it as a 3 casting cost creature. I see it more as a 4, 5, or 6 through its modal abilities. Now, a lot of the times, I'll use it to gain 4 life, but it also removes artifacts and enchantments, so stuff like talents, stuff like opposing virtues, it's good against that. And if the opponent has the need for their graveyard, you can use this to remove their graveyard. Some may consider this a sideboard card, but I think the metagame dictates that, hey, this is a good main deck card. Finally, I have Flesh Gorger. It's a high casting cost creature on par with Vaultborn Tyrant, so if you ever have your tyrants removed, well, hey, you have another option. But it gains life, it has menace, you can cast it early on if need be, and it's also a pain to remove because, one, your opponent can't hit with Go for the Throat, and for two, it's got a ward cost. So even though it's just a one of, I think it's got a place into this deck. Let me talk about the removal real quick. Number 1, Anoint with Affliction. Now, I know a lot of people have been playing Go for the Throat, but I think Anoint with Affliction is a very strong card currently in the metagame because a lot of the creatures are low to the ground. Their 3 converted mana costs are lower, so having this be an exile ability instead of a kill ability is great for 2 types of creatures. Number 1, you have creatures with death triggers such as Goldvein Hydra, Heartfire Hero, Cacophony Scamp, and with the red creatures in particular, if your opponent swings in and commits some pump spells to that creature, then you can use this and that'll nullify their combat damage and cost them that pump spell. So very good card against red. Number 2, since it's exiles, it removes graveyard recursion, so stuff like Zoraline, stuff like Mosswood Dread Knight, 2 very popular cards. You stop the recursion, stop the card draw from them, and overall, I think it's a good removal spell. Hey, even in control matchups, you can use this to remove tokens, manlands, right? So even though it's not the ideal choice versus control, it's not dead. Assassin's Trophy is just a good general utility removal spell. I don't like 3. I prefer 2 because I think it's not that good early on because the opponent can use the lands they fetch to their advantage, but it's a good way to answer threats. It removes planeswalkers, lands, enchantments, artifacts, so on, right? Just assess the game state, use it best to your advantage. For creatures that are 4 and above that can't be hit with Anoint, you have Deadly Cover-Up and Season of Loss. Season of Loss, you're generally using the 5 paw print option to have the opponent sacrifice 5 creatures. I can see how that 3 paw print option of making the opponent lose life can be a fringe win condition, but I haven't had it happen yet. Deadly Cover-Up, I think, is a superior option because of that extirpate effect, so you can turn those early game Anoints, Heaped Harvests, and Glimpse the Cores into cards that fuel this spell and remove win conditions in the opponent's graveyard, library, deck. And it also lets you look at the opponent's hand if you choose that option, so overall I think it's a good card that's also not dead in control. Next up, I want to talk about the Draw Suite. I have 3 Up the Beanstalks and 2 Stargazes. Originally I had 4, but I found that 3 Up the Beanstalks were better because the decks that run 4 Up the Beanstalks, they have ways to abuse it better. Generally, I've seen those decks run 15 higher mana, 15 5 or more mana casting cost spells, and they also run Cornucopia to gain life so that they can survive to cast those spells. They also have that Oblivion Ring spell. I forget the name of it, but it's that instant 6 mana enchantment that reduces its cost on domain, exile target permanent as long as it's in play, right? So rather than run 4, I run 2 Stargaze. This is the newest addition to the deck. I literally just added it tonight, but I think it has good synergy with the deck. You have ample amount of life gain. If need be, you can cast it for 5 with an X mana casting cost of 3 to work with the Beanstalk, and it's just a way to refuel your hand because you're offsetting, you're using up a lot of your hand through the ramp, and so you're trying to use that ramp to play a spell. So Stargaze lets you restock your hand. Finally, I want to talk about Virtue of Persistent Lockswain Scorn. Virtue of Persistence, life gain, early removal. Not much to say about that. And Lockswain Scorn, not only does it let you recur your threats, synergy with Up the Beanstalk, and you can also pull creatures from your opponent's graveyard, so whether that be a Deep Cavern Bat to slow down an opponent, whether that be to pull out one of their win conditions. It's a good card if you can get it out. Next up is lands. 4 Restless Kaj, big fat 4/4 beats, produces food so it gains you life, and it also exiles a card, so a great little creature to have. Usually I'm pulling it out, animating it to beat down on planeswalkers, but it's a good creature to have. Fabled Passage, talked about it earlier, synergy with Conduit of Worlds, mana fixing. Blooming Marsh, I chose this over the other black-green duel just because the early game's quite important, so I need this untapped. So early game, you have your removal, you have your ramp. You want to set up and then go from there. Finally, I want to talk about Blast Zone. Blast Zone, again, recursion with Conduit of Worlds, but it's a good way of removing permanents, answering large swarms of similarly costed creatures, and it's also hard to counter for opponents. I think one use case I've seen is using it against Deep Cavern Bats. So for example, they'll pull out some removal versus bats versus you, and then you use this to blow up their bats, and then you get the removal. So finally, I want to talk about the sideboard. Another Assassin's Trophy, I'll bring that out, versus Control, where they have not necessarily low casting cost creatures, but threats like Fountain Port, Planeswalkers, etc. Choking Miasma, I decided to put that in against Lizards and other Swarm decks. Lizards in particular, I feel you need some redundancy because of that 3 mana Lizard that lets them pick a card out of your hand. So I found this useful. I think Lizards doesn't have any need for Graveyard Recursion, so I chose Miasma over that other spell. And this has some synergy with your creatures because you can use a kicker to pump up a Flesh Gorger, for example. Cut down, again, more creature hate. I'll usually drop some of the higher casting cost spells like Season of Loss, Cover Up, etc. Especially if I'm facing a deck with haste. With haste, a lot of these board wipes lose value because you'll want instant speed removal to counter that haste. So I'll take out these slower sorcery spells, not totally, but some of them, to make room for these instant speed removals. Next up is Sorcerous Spyglass, and this is one of my favorite cards to sneak in against opponents because a lot of people don't know about it. It shuts down the activated abilities of a named card and lets you look at the opponent's hand. So you can use this to plan out your strategy for victory, and then shut down problem cards like Planeswalkers, Vraska, Betrayal Sting, Jace. Liliana of the Veil is probably the most common Planeswalker I hit with it. And out of the 3 Planeswalkers I mentioned are black. And again, black has difficulty dealing with artifacts and enchantments. You can also use this to stop talents from leveling up, so Innkeeper's Talent, Bandit's Talent. You in this case you want to drop this reactively, so they drop it, keep it at 1, and they can't level it up to level 2 or level 3. Finally, this answers lands, Fountain Port, Mirex, Restless Cycle of Manlands. So good utility. Sometimes I'll drop 2, sometimes I'll drop 3. It depends on how many key activated abilities I see that the opponent uses. Finally, I want to talk about the heist cards. Cruel Claw's Heist, Outrageous Robbery. Starting off with Cruel Claw's Heist. I like it over Duress. But paying the gift a card cost usually lets you pull out a win condition or an answer according to game state, and it lets you play it. So I think having that extra card, considering how often you're dumping your hand to play lands, can put you in a favorable position. Outrageous Robbery, in Control generally, if you can draw more cards than your opponent, that puts you in a favorable position. So with a large amount of lands you're getting from your ramp, that X casting cost is usually 7+, so you're drawing 7+ cards, and that's usually enough to win you the game. I also like that it's an instant spell, so if you're playing a counter-based control deck and they carelessly tap out, then again, that's drawing 7 against a counter-based control deck, and that means more threats than they have answers for. So, very great card, very fun card to play with, and that about covers this deck. Now, I'll have a link to the deck in the description below if you want to check it out, peruse it. I do encourage you to try this out, whether this be you sleeve it up or you get this in an arena. But yeah, let me change this out real quick. Okay, hey, thanks for watching. I'll be putting up more decks. This is my first deck on Moxfield. I just got back into Magic, just got back into YouTube. You can follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. Username is Cardboard.Capitan. And my Moxfield, I only have this deck, but I'll be adding more. In particular, I think I want to add an Alchemy deck I've been considering once the new Alchemy set drops. My username is Cardboard.Capitan on there. So if you like the video, drop a thumbs up on the comments. Drop a comment if you have anything to say, and I'll check you out next time.